Interview with James Fenton about his life on basically in the Second World War in Burma, Malaysia, and India in the Royal Artillery. Mr. Fenton, what were you doing before you enlisted in 1942?
Well, I was training in art, really, because from my very young days, my father was also interested in art. He did a little bit of work. He often used to get the newspapers and say, the painting competition, do this painting. So eventually I really was interested in drawing and painting, and I did quite a lot. Now, my brother had no inclination whatsoever to do any painting. So my father then, when I went through my primary school training and my other education, when it was time to leave school at 14, my father said, oh, come on, nearby was the Accrington School of Art. We only lived a couple of miles. I lived in Oswaldtwistle, which is just a couple of miles from the Accrington. And we went along there, and my father took me in to see the head teacher, which was a very great man from the Royal College of Art. And because of my capabilities and what my father was showing him, I did get entrance to the school, which I didn't need. Otherwise, some of the students had to pay the fees to get in there. So that was the job I started from the age of 14.
So you left at 20, you enlisted in the Royal Artillery.
Yes.
Was that a bit of a wrench, having to leave the artwork you were doing?
It was more than a wrench, but the actual reason how it came about, my enlistment was delayed by a few months. I should have been in the army earlier. They sent me the call-up papers, but this was early in the year. I was due to take my special examinations for college at the beginning of the year. Now, the call-up papers would have interrupted that, so my father got special dispensation for me to have this extended so that I could take my examinations for college before I joined the army. And this I actually did. In fact, I just finished the exams that I had to do. This was for the Royal College of Art in London. And immediately after finishing them, then my papers did come in. And as a matter of principle, I didn't even know the results of my examinations when I joined the army. And it was only after being in the army for 2 or 3 weeks that the results came out. And one person from the art school wrote to me and said, "Oh, you've passed, you've got through, you're okay." So then I was actually destined to go to college, but that interrupted the whole situation.
In 1942, obviously, you joined the Royal Artillery. Did you want to join the Royal Artillery, or?
No, that's a strange thing. I think it's all down to statistics and conditions, because I wasn't classed as A1. So that meant I wasn't going in. You see, what do you do first of all? You go for primary training to do infantry training or whatever training is to become accustomed to the army. And that lasts about 6 weeks. And I went to Carlisle for this. I was in Carlisle Castle. At the end of primary training, they then make an assessment of your capabilities and what you're best suited for. And because by that time you have been studied and watched and shown what your progress was, your abilities, and at the end of this training program, you then go have a discussion with an officer for what position you're going to be or what would you like to be. Now, it was his decision. Because I did have some slight problems with my feet, that saved me from going in the infantry. Now, the next thing, of course, was, I don't know, maybe they were short of artillerymen, but then, or gunners, as I should say. They then said, "Oh, well, I'm going to send you along to the artillery." Okay, and that will be in Edinburgh. So I then went on from there to train as a gunner, first of all, and then as a signaller in the Royal Artillery.
You presumably went then to India, which must have been rather a culture shock because, well, it's very hot for one thing, and rather different to what you were used to.
Well, that was very strange because you see, once you've got your papers and you know that you've done your training and you're going to go into action, then of course you don't know where you're going to go. All sorts of rumours abound about where are we going, and we had no idea whatsoever. But they sent me then from my initial training to a regiment. Now that regiment was down in the south, and from then on I joined a regiment of 25-pounders, Royal Artillery field guns, and then soon after that, of course, you become acclimatised to all the friends you've got there. Then they decide they're going to send you abroad. But the question is, where are you going to go? And it's all a mystery to you because they don't release these facts because in case of security. And it wasn't until we were on the boat to India that we realised where we were going.
Did you go round the Cape or did you go through the Suez Canal?
So the Suez Canal was closed.
So round the Cape.
They couldn't go through the Suez. I had to go around South Africa. Now that was another advantage in life, really, because it's surprising how all these things do enlighten you one way or another. And as we got to Cape Town, we had to change ships. So waiting for another ship, we were in Cape Town for 6 weeks. So that was a lovely, lovely 6 weeks of heaven, really, because to them there was no war at all. There we were eating bananas, coconuts, pineapples, anything we wanted, no restriction on rations whatsoever. Now this we had just suffered coming from England, no bananas for us, only for the children. But in Cape Town we were eating bananas, and you'd walk along outside and just see a man with pineapples, ask him for a slice of pineapple, he'd chop a pineapple, and you'd take a slice of pineapple. We
It's a different world,
It
wasn't
was
it?
all together. So then from there we went on. When we got the ship, when the ship was ready for us to take us to further on, we went down on to Bombay, straight to Bombay. And from there we went to a training camp in Pune, a Royal Artillery training camp in Pune.
The famous Pune, where a lot of soldiers actually went and trained. All the time, of course, the Japanese were advancing towards India.
Well, we were learning all about that and also about the European War, but we didn't know what we were going to do in Burma, except for the fact that we had guns and we were an artillery unit. Now, the unusual thing or the strangest thing that came along, not long after we'd been in training in Pune, they decided to take our 25-pounder field guns from us, because a 25-pounder field gun in the jungle is a huge gun. Mm-hmm. It's a brilliant gun. It's a very substantial gun for the Royal Artillery. But because it's not much use in the jungle, or let's put it another way, there are guns that are better use. And they changed our guns from 25-pounders to a 3.7 howitzer, known as a screw gun. Now, the screw gun was made very famous by Kipling. He wrote a poem about it, and it's a gun that you can actually pull to pieces and take over the mountains. The barrel comes in 2 pieces, the 2 wheels are separated, the trail, which holds the gun together, comes in 2 pieces, and the whole thing can actually, if necessary, be carried by the gunners themselves. Generally, they're put onto mules, but we didn't have mules, but so that didn't come into the question.
Well, you were the mules, weren't you?
Well, we were, but fortunately, I don't ever recall them having been taken to pieces. The only time that they were taken to pieces was when the guns went into Burma. because rather than drive them all the way, we were down, so then drive them all the way in, they decided to send them in by parachute. And they were actually dropped in. They were broken down, dropped in by parachute into Burma itself.
What was the jungle like when you were introduced to it?
Well, that was very strange. And, it was hell at times, because there was such a contrast, you see, between the climate itself. I mean, the monsoon rains, you're actually covered in mud, you're sloshing in mud, your boots were stick actually in the mud. There'd be such a gurgle as you pulled out your boot from the mud trying to walk along. And then again, when you got the hot weather, it was so hot, and one of the problems that the body suffers is prickly heat, because it's the salt in the body coming out, and it causes very irritable pimples on the skin. And it was due to this we had to drink salt water just to replenish the actual salt that you were losing on your body.
And malaria was an enormous problem.
That malaria was terrible, and that was one of the things everyone was afraid of. Now, we did have quite a number of our men who actually did suffer from malaria. Fortunately, I don't know why it was, I was just lucky. Of course, the mosquitoes perhaps that had malaria didn't like me, because of course, you know, the mosquito is the carrier of this disease. But and of course, I was bitten continuously. Now, another remedy for this, or not a remedy, but protection, was some terribly stinking, smelly cream that you had to put on, because it was only at certain periods that the mosquitoes would come out for the rainy season and things. So you had to smear your body or your arms or face, any exposed skin, with this malarial cream.
And this was before you came anywhere near the enemy.
Oh,
were you close to Kohima, to the famous ridge, to the tennis court, to where the apex of the battle?
I just missed that, because I did go into the north part of Burma, but this was just as the Japanese had reached the borders of India, and that's where the whole trouble was. And there was quite a great deal of fighting there, and it was fortunately, or yes, I say fortunately, I was on my way into Burma when the big battle in Myitkyina happened. We did get into Myitkyina, but as the Japanese were then being sent back, really, because we were beginning to push them back.
General Slim's army was historically known as the Forgotten Army. Did you feel that you were unloved, unthought of back home?
Well, we did really think we were forgotten, because every time we could listen to the news about the European war on the radio, and we would listen in the evening or whenever we could, if we had some spare time or when we weren't being shelled, to discover what the situation was in Europe. And we were listening and listening, but never once did we hear anything. There might be just one little snippet that would come along and say something about Burma, but therefore that's how we really got the name, the Forgotten Army.
Obviously, you were shelled by the Japanese.
Mostly we were shelled every night, and they would range their guns, and it was mainly at night they would shell us, and we would all dash around. You see, with the gun position, the guns are in the centre. You have to have a position where you can fire the guns, a reasonably fairly open space, because it's no good trying to shoot through trees. That's impossible, and that's why we had the howitzers. But the gun positions were then set in a certain position as we advanced, and slit trenches, 2-men slit trench, were displayed a whole round the outside of the perimeter. And at night we were on guard, 2 men in a slit trench, and each slit trench was in communication with the next one. So it made a complete defence position so that it would protect the guns if we were attacked at night.
Did you feel fear? Did you feel at any moment you could be losing your life?
I could tell you that there were probably about 4 occasions when, I was absolutely scared to death. And one very particular, I thought, I'm not going to get out of this, because it really was very bad. Now, one amusing incident, which is part of this situation, I can tell you, I had been on duty on the telephone exchange through the night whilst we had been shelled. But you see, the telephone, all these places that you have, the telephone exchange, were all in dugouts, protected. So we had some protection, and we were being shelled. One of the shells had hit one of our trucks, destroyed the truck. But on another occasion, I came out of my duties in the morning when it got daylight, after the shelling had stopped, and I saw a group of soldiers, my friends, all gathering around, excited, jumping about. I thought, what is going on here? So I walked over to them. What had happened, one of the Japanese shells had landed near one of the Burma huts, and had caused such a hole in the ground, and the lads had found a stash of silver rupees.
That had been hidden away, right?
The occupants, of course, had left them there thinking they were going to return and collect their loot. But the boys were here sharing out all these Indian silver rupees. Unfortunately, I never got one.
On the wall, you've got a kukri. Now, you fought with the Gurkhas. The Gurkhas were there as
yes,
well. They were extraordinary soldiers.
I was very friendly with the Gurkhas. In fact, I've got a sketch of a Gurkha. And also a Gurkha, one occasion, came to me. They couldn't all speak English. Some of them could speak English, and they were quite good, really. And one of them, towards the latter part of my duties, when I had my camera there, he found out that I had a camera and I'd been developing my prints. So he came to me with a camera. He said, could I develop his film? So I actually developed his film, but before he had one film left on the roll. He said, look, let me take your picture. So he took my picture, which is in my book now, in one of the pages of the book, taken by this Gurkha. But I developed the film for him and gave him back his film.
You have, of course, written a book which is very detailed. Do you think back with fondness to that time, or do you think back with, it was a terrible time, or what?
It's mixed feelings. Because, at the end of the war, I'm talking now 1945, 46, 47, I never spoke about the war to my wife. She knows little about what happened to me in Burma, and neither did I. And even my brother, he was landed with the troops on D-Day in France, and he was wounded. But with him and I, we never exchanged our stories. You didn't want to speak about it. The whole situation was, you couldn't go and talk to another friend, say, in the pub about the war, someone who was your age, because he'd already been through the war. What's the good of trying to tell him what it was like being shelled in Burma when he'd been shelled in Europe?